My boss fired me after 15 years to hide his fraud. But I brought down his empire. He sat in the glass-walled conference room, the Seattle skyline glinting through the rain-streaked windows, and listened to the words that would unravel 15 years of my life. We can hire 3 junior engineers for what we're paying you, Michael, Richard Hayes said, his lips curling into a smirk. Nothing personal, just business. My name is Michael Carter, 52 years old, lead systems engineer at Nextlify Solutions. For a decade and a half, I'd built their entire tech infrastructure from the ground up. Every server, every line of code, every AI-driven tenant portal that made Nextlify the go-to platform for luxury apartment complexes across the Pacific Northwest. I'd kept it running so flawlessly that the executives forgot how much they needed me, until they decided they did. Richard Hayes, the new chief technology officer, sat across from me, all polished confidence in his tailored suit and Stanford MBA swagger. He was 40, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a habit of name-dropping tech moguls in casual conversation. He'd been with Nextlify for 8 months, brought in to modernize the company, which apparently meant slashing anyone over 50 to make room for his vision. Next to him, Karen from HR slid a manila folder across the table, her eyes fixed on the polished wood to avoid mine. "The severance is fair," she said, her voice flat. 3 months' salary, plus your accrued vacation. "We appreciate your service." I opened the folder, scanned the numbers, and felt a cold weight settle in my chest. 15 years, reduced to a few lines of legalese and a check that wouldn't cover my mortgage for a year. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice steady, though my hands gripped the folder a little too tightly. Richard tilted his head, his designer glasses catching the fluorescent light. "I thought you'd have more to say, Michael. Most people in your position do questions, concerns, maybe a little pushback." He sounded almost disappointed, like he'd been rehearsing for a fight I wasn't giving him. Karen glanced at him, then back at me, her discomfort palpable. "What's there to say?" I replied, shrugging. "You've made your decision." Richard's smirk faltered for a split second, replaced by something colder. "Well, we'd value your help with the transition," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The new team could use some guidance on your legacy systems, a short consulting gig, perhaps." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about the late nights I'd spent debugging code while my kids slept, the weekends I'd sacrificed to keep Nextlify systems online during outages, the countless times I'd warned the board about understaffing the IT department. I thought about my wife, Sarah, waiting at home, and our 2 kids, Emma and Liam, who were counting on me to keep our house, our life, intact. "I'll think about it," I said finally, knowing I wouldn't. Richard extended his hand, and I shook it, his grip firm but perfunctory. "Good luck, Michael," he said, already looking at his phone. Karen mumbled something about clearing out my desk by end of day. I nodded and walked out, the glass door hissing shut behind me. The open-plan office buzzed with the usual hum of keyboards and low conversations, but it felt different now, like I was a ghost moving through a world I no longer belonged to. My teammate engineers I'd mentored over the years sat at their desks, heads down, avoiding my gaze. They'd been called into a meeting an hour earlier, one I hadn't been invited to. As I reached my corner office, I saw Richard standing at the front of the room, addressing the entire department. His voice carried through the glass partition. "Michael's systems were built for a different era," he said, gesturing to a projected slide titled Nextlify 2.0. "They're clunky, overcomplicated, and frankly, holding us back. We're moving to a leaner, cloud-based architecture, and we don't need one person thinking they're indispensable. A murmur rippled through the team. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. He wasn't just firing me, he was rewriting my legacy, painting me as the problem. Then he did something worse. He pulled up a shared drive on the projector, opened a folder labeled Carter's Projects, and deleted it in front of everyone. Years of architecture diagrams, custom scripts, and system logs gone with a click. We're starting fresh, he said, his tone almost gleeful. No baggage. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. My lead developer, Tara, caught my eye through the glass, her face pale with shock. I shook my head slightly, signaling her to stay quiet. There was no point fighting this now. I packed my desk in under 10 minutes. A photo of Sarah and the kids. At Pike Place Market, a mug Emma had painted for Father's Day, a stack of old notebooks filled with system designs. 15 years fit into a single reusable grocery bag. As I walked to the elevator, Richard's voice echoed in my head. Nothing personal, just business. But it was personal. He hadn't just fired me, he'd humiliated me, erased my work, and made sure everyone saw it. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time, I let myself feel the anger burning under my calm. Not rage, not yet, but a quiet, focused fury that would carry me forward. In the parking garage, I tossed the bag into the back of my SUV and checked my phone. A text from Tara. Mike, I'm so sorry. The team's pissed. Richard's already assigning your projects to the new hires. I didn't reply. Another message. This one from my old friend Nate, a data analyst I'd hired a decade ago. Heard what happened? Call me. This is BS. I slid the phone into my pocket and drove home, the Seattle rain blurring the windshield like static. My house, a modest craftsman in Fremont, felt smaller as I pulled into the driveway. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun. You're home early, she said, then saw my face. What happened? I told her everything. Richard's smirk, the severance, the deleted files, the way he'd turned my team against me. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her knife pausing mid-chop. They can't do this to you, she said, her voice low but fierce. You built that company. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light. For her sake. They think they can do better without me. She set the knife down and crossed her arms. And what do you think? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped onto our back deck, overlooking the grey expanse of Lake Union. The water churned under the drizzle, reflecting the city lights like scattered coins. I thought about the system I'd built. Every custom API, every security protocol, every failover I'd coded by hand because Nexlify wouldn't pay for a proper team. I thought about the late-night alerts I'd fixed while Sarah slept, the times I'd missed Liam's soccer games to keep the tenant portal online. And I thought about something else, a discrepancy I'd noticed in the payment processing logs a month ago. A series of transfers to an offshore account that didn't add up. I'd flagged it for Richard, but he'd dismissed it as a glitch. Now, I wasn't so sure. Sarah joined me on the deck, her hand resting on my shoulder. What are you going to do, Mike? She asked, her voice softer now. I took a sip of the coffee she'd brought me, the bitterness grounding me. Something will come up, I said, but my mind was already turning. Richard didn't know it yet, but he'd made a mistake. I hadn't just built Nexlify's systems, I'd designed them to need me. The undocumented redundancies, the hidden encryption layers, the custom AI that balanced tenant data across servers. They were mine, and mine alone. I wasn't going to beg for my job back. I wasn't going to consult for pennies. But I wasn't going to let Richard bury me either. Not when I held the keys to everything he thought he controlled. I'd built Nexlify Solutions from a scrappy startup with a single server in a closet to a tech powerhouse, managing over 50,000 luxury apartments across the West Coast. When I started 15 years ago, they were called Cascade Properties, a small firm with a clunky website and a fax machine that jammed every other day. I was 37, fresh off a consulting gig in Portland, hired by the founder, Tom Wheeler, who shook my hand and said, "Mike, build us something that lasts." I did. I coded the first tenant portal myself, a system that handled rent payments, maintenance requests, and background checks with an AI backbone I'd designed to scale. As Cascade grew, rebranding to Nexlify and acquiring properties from Seattle to San Diego, I upgraded the infrastructure piece by piece custom APIs, encrypted databases, failover clusters that kept the system humming through power outages and cyber attacks. I wasn't just an engineer. I was the guy who made sure the lights stayed on, but things changed when Tom retired 3 years ago. A private equity firm, Horizon Capital, bought Nexlify, and the new board cared more about quarterly profits than long-term stability. They rejected my requests for a documentation team, calling it unnecessary overhead. They brought in consultants with shiny laptops and buzzwords like disruption and cloud first, who nodded through my briefings but never grasped the system's complexity. I kept pushing back, explaining why their off-the-shelf solutions wouldn't integrate with my custom code. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to strategy meetings. Sarah saw it coming before I did. "They're sidelining you, Mike," she said one night, over dinner, her fork hovering over her plate. "You need to protect yourself." I brushed it off. "They can't run this place without me. No one else knows how it all fits together." She gave me a look that said I was being naive, and maybe I was. 8 months ago, they hired Richard Hayes as CTO. He swept in from a fintech startup in San Francisco. All charisma and promises of Nexlify 2.0. He was 40, with a penthouse in Belltown and Aduthion. He bragged about docking at Lake Washington. He hired 3 junior engineers straight out of MIT, bright kids who shadowed me for weeks, asking questions about load balancers and AI training datasets. I answered patiently, but I could tell they were in over their heads. It had taken me years to master the system's interdependencies, the way the AI balanced tenant data to prevent crashes, the hidden security layers I'd built to thwart hackers. You don't learn that in a semester. Richard didn't care. He wanted agile and cost-efficient, and I was neither in his eyes. The first warning came a month before my termination. I'd noticed odd transactions in the payment logs. Small sums, $10,000 here, $20,000 there, funneled to an offshore account in the Caymans. It wasn't a glitch. The transfers were coded to bypass the system's audit trails. I flagged it for Richard, attaching a report with the transaction IDs. "Probably a testing error," he replied in an email, his tone dismissive. "I'll handle it." I didn't push, but I saved a copy of the logs on an encrypted USB drive, just in case. Looking back, that was the moment I should have seen Richard wasn't just incompetent. He was hiding something. The calls started 2 days after my termination. I was in my home office, tweaking my LinkedIn profile, when my phone buzzed. Richard Hayes. I let it go to voicemail. Michael, it's Richard. We're having issues with the tenant portal. The new team's struggling with some of your undocumented code. Can you call me back? It's urgent. His voice had an edge, not quite panic, but close. I deleted the message and kept typing. By noon, 3 more voicemails piled up, each one more desperate. Tara texted me. Portal's been down for 6 hours. Residents can't pay rent. Richards. Freaking out, that evening, Karen from HR called. Michael, we'd like to offer a consulting arrangement, she said, her tone overly polite. Just a few weeks to help the team. $250 an hour, minimum 4-hour blocks. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the lake through the window. How generous is that, Karen? I asked. She hesitated. We could go to $300, I told her. I'd think about it and hung up the next morning. I woke to an email from Richard, sent to the entire engineering department and CC'd to me. The subject line read, "Moving forward with Nexlify 2.0. Team," it began. As we transition to a modern architecture, we're addressing the challenges left by Michael Carter's outdated systems. His over-engineered code has caused today's outages, but rest assured, our new engineers are working tirelessly to fix his mistakes. I read it twice, my jaw tightening. He wasn't just firing me, he was blaming me for his failures, rewriting history in front of my team. Attached was a screenshot of the tenant portal's error log, with a red circle around a line of my code, labeled Carter's bug. It wasn't a bug. It was a security check I'd written to prevent unauthorized transfers. Like the ones I'd flagged to Richard. Sarah found me staring at the email, my coffee gone cold. "He's burying you," she said, her voice shaking. With anger, "You can't let him do this." I didn't respond, but the email lit something in me, a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, Nate called. "Mike, it's worse than you think," he said, his voice low. "I was auditing the payment system, and those transfers you flagged. They're still happening. Bigger amounts now, routed through shell accounts. I think Richard's involved." I gripped the phone, my mind racing. "Can you get me proof?" I asked. "Already on it," he said. "I've got backups of the logs, but be careful. Richard's telling everyone you sabotaged the system before you left." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the USB drive. In my hand, Sarah was upstairs, reading to Emma, who'd been quieter since her last doctor's visit. Emma's asthma had worsened, and our insurance tied to Nexlify was set to expire in a month. Richard knew that. I'd mentioned it during a performance review, asking for flexibility to work from home when Emma was sick. He'd nodded sympathetically, then done nothing. Now, with the severance barely covering our bills, I felt the walls closing in, but I wasn't helpless. I plugged the drive into my laptop and started digging through the logs Nate had sent. The transfers were clever disguised as vendor payments, split across multiple properties to avoid detection. But they all traced back to the same account Richard had dismissed as a glitch. I cross-referenced the dates with Richard's expense reports, publicly filed with the board. A $50,000 transfer matched a down payment on his Dooth Iron. Another $30,000 lined up with a lease on his Belltown penthouse. He wasn't just skimming, he was stealing millions. The next blow came a week later. Karen emailed me, her tone clipped. "Due to budgetary constraints, Nexlify will terminate your family's health insurance effective immediately." I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. Emma's inhalers, Her specialist visits they'd cost thousands out of pocket. Sarah read the email over my shoulder, her face pale. "They can't do this," she whispered. "It's retaliation." I knew she was right. Richard was tightening the screws, punishing me for not crawling back to consult. I called Karen, my voice calm but edged with steel. "This is about Emma's medical care. You're cutting off a child's insurance." She stammered, "It's not personal, Michael. It's policy." I hung up, my hands shaking. Not personal. That phrase again. The system failures escalated. Tara texted me updates. Maintenance requests are piling up. AI's misrouting payments. Residents are threatening to sue. By the second week, local news picked up the story. A headline in the Seattle Times read, "Nexlify Solutions faces outrage as tech glitches strand tenants." The article quoted Richard, who blamed legacy issues from prior management. My name wasn't mentioned, but the implication was clear. He was framing me as the villain, and it was working. A former colleague, someone I'd trained, posted on LinkedIn, "Sad to see Nexlify struggle due to poor engineering decisions in the past." I wanted to scream, to tell the world the truth, but I held back. Anger wouldn't win this. Strategy would. I started looking for new opportunities, but the market was brutal. Tech layoffs were everywhere in 2025, and at 52, I was overqualified for most roles. Then, an email arrived from Peak Pulse Technologies, a smaller competitor to Net, known for managing eco-friendly apartment complexes. The sender was Laura Chen, their director of engineering. "Michael, your reputation precedes you," she wrote. "We've admired Nexlify's systems for years. We're expanding and need someone to lead our tech overhaul. Can we talk?" I replied within the hour, setting a meeting for the next day. That evening, as Sarah and I cooked dinner, the doorbell rang. Richard Hayes stood on my porch, his suit rumpled, his usual smirk replaced by a strained smile. "Michael, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced," he said, glancing at the neighbor's house like he was worried about being seen. "We're in a crisis. The system's crashing daily, the board's breathing down my neck. We need your help." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sounds rough," I said, my tone neutral. He shifted his weight, his glasses slipping slightly. "We're prepared to pay $500 an hour for consulting. Whatever it takes to get the system back online." I thought about Emma's inhaler, the mortgage payment due next week, the email blaming me for his mess. I thought about the transfers, the Duthine, the lies. "I'm sorry, Richard," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I've got an interview tomorrow. I'm moving on." His face hardened, the mask slipping. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You walk away, and we'll make sure everyone knows you tanked this company." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Good luck with that," I said, and closed the door. The interview with Laura Chen was a breath of fresh air. We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, the air thick with the scent of espresso and rain. "I've followed your work," she said, stirring her latte. Nexlify's AI portal was groundbreaking. "We want something like it, but better sustainable. Documented, built to last." I nodded, feeling a spark of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. "Why me?" I asked. "There are younger engineers out there, cheaper ones." Laura laughed. "We tried that. Hired a hotshot from Google who built us a flashy app that crashes under load. We need experience, Michael. We need you." She offered me the role of chief systems architect, full benefits, stock options, and a salary 15% higher than Nexlify's. I accepted on the spot. Meanwhile, Nextlefi was imploding. Nate kept me updated via encrypted texts. The tenant portal was offline for days, costing millions in lost rent. The board hired a consulting firm, Tech Trend Solutions, to salvage the system. But they were stumped without my documentation, Richard's. Emails grew frantic, then hostile. One, sent to the entire company and accidentally CC'd to me, read, "Carter's sabotage has set us back months. We're pursuing legal action to hold him accountable." I forwarded it to a lawyer friend, who laughed. "They've got nothing," she said. "Your contract's clean and you didn't take a single file." Still, the accusation stung. He was dragging my name through the mud, betting I'd stay silent. Then Nate dropped a bombshell. He'd found a deleted email chain in the system. Archives recovered from a backup I'd designed to prevent data loss. It was between Richard and Horizon Capital's CEO, dated months before my termination. "Carter's a liability," Richard wrote. "His systems are a black box, and he's too expensive. We can replace him with juniors and sell the company before the cracks show. The payment transfers are secure, nobody's looking." The CEO's reply was curt, "Do it. Clean house before the sale." I read the emails in my home office, the lake outside shimmering under a rare Seattle sunset. Richard hadn't just fired Mahid, planned it to hide his theft, to make Nextlefi look profitable for a quick flip, and he'd almost gotten away. With it, I shared the emails with Laura at Peak Pulse, who raised an eyebrow. "This is dynamite," she said, "but we need to be smart. If you go public now, it's your word against his." She was right. I needed leverage, something undeniable. So I focused on Peak Pulse, designing a new system from scratch, modular, documented, with training programs for the team. I hired Tara and Nate, who'd both quit Nextlefi after Richard's latest stunt, docking their pay to cover the consulting firm's fees. We worked late, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. Peak Pulse's CEO, Javier Morales, saw the potential. "If we can handle a big client," he told me, "we'll overtake Nextlefi in a year." The opportunity came, faster than I expected. 3 weeks into my role, Laura got a call from Cascade Heights, Nextlefi's biggest client, managing 12,000 units across Oregon and Washington. Their tenants were furious about the outages, and they were shopping for a new platform. Javier and I pitched them a migration plan, promising a seamless transition to Peak Pulse's system. They signed a letter of intent the next day. When Richard heard, he called me, his voice ragged. "Michael, you're poaching our clients now. This is low, even for you." I let him rant, then said, "You made a business decision, Richard." "So did I." He hung up, but not before muttering something about consequences. I didn't care. The game was on, and I was playing to win. 2 months into my role at Peak Pulse Technologies, everything changed. Laura Chen burst into my office, her eyes wide with urgency. "Michael, Cascade Heights just signed the full contract," she said, tossing a signed document onto my desk. "They're migrating all 12,000 units to our platform next quarter." I leaned back in my chair, a rare smile breaking through. Cascade Heights was Nextlefi's lifeline, and we'd taken it. But that wasn't all. Laura lowered her voice. "There's more. Horizon Capital's panicking. Nextlefi's outages are tanking their valuation, and they're looking to sell fast. Javier thinks we can buy them out for pennies on the dollar." I stared at her, processing the irony. The company that fired me, that tried to bury me, was now on its knees, and Peak Pulse was poised to deliver the final blow. That evening, I sat on my deck, the lights of Lake Union shimmering below. Sarah joined me, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Emma's doctor called," she said, her voice steady but hopeful. "Her new treatment's working, but we need insurance back soon." I nodded, my jaw tight. Richard's decision to cut our coverage still burned, a reminder of how far he'd gone to break me. But I wasn't broken. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted folder Nate had sent, a goldmine of evidence. Emails between Richard and Horizon's CEO, transaction logs tying his offshore account to millions in stolen funds. Even a memo where he bragged about streamlining Nexlify by firing me to hide the cracks. It was enough to bury him, but I needed the right moment. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week later, Horizon Capital called an emergency board meeting at Nexlify's headquarters, and they invited me not as an employee, but as Peak Pulse's chief systems architect, representing our bid to acquire Nexlify. Laura and Javier prepped me, but I had my own plan. I arrived at Nexlify's glass tower, the same building where Richard had humiliated me. The boardroom was tense, a dozen suits around a mahogany table, with Richard at the head. His tie loosened, his smirk long gone. He froze when he saw me, his eyes darting to the USB drive in my hand. "Michael," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect you here." I nodded, my face unreadable. Life's full of surprises. The board chair, a grey-haired exec, named Margaret Voss, opened the meeting. "Nexlify is facing unprecedented challenges," she said, glancing at Richard. "System failures, client losses, and a 60% drop in valuation. Peak Pulse has made an offer to acquire us, and we're here to discuss it." Richard jumped in, his voice strained. "We don't need to sell. The outages are under control, and our new team's making progress. Michael's departure caused some hiccups, but we're past that." He shot me a look, daring me to contradict him. I didn't. Not yet. Margaret turned to me. "Mr. Carter, Peak Pulse's bid is compelling, but we need assurances your platform can handle our scale." I stood, connecting my laptop to the projector. "I built Nexlify's systems for 15 years, I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know what they can do and what they can't. Peak Pulse's platform is ready to take on Cascade Heights and more, but there's something you need to see first." I opened the email chain from Richard to Horizon's CEO, projecting it. On the screen, the room went silent. "These are internal communications," I said, clicking through. "They show Richard planned my termination to hide financial irregularities. He deleted my documentation to cover his tracks, then blamed me for the outages." Richard's face turned ashen. "This is fabricated," he stammered, standing. "He's bitter about being fired. He sabotaged us." I didn't flinch. Instead, I played a recorded voicemail he'd left me last week, his voice desperate. "Michael, name your price. We'll bury the sabotage claims if you fix the system." Gasps rippled through the board. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hayes, sit down." I kept going, showing the transaction logs. Richard siphoned $4.2 million to an offshore account. I said, highlighting the transfers. He used vendor payments as a cover, timing them with his Duthion purchase and penthouse lease. "This isn't a glitch, it's theft." Richard lunged for the projector, but two board members restrained. You set me up," he shouted, his glasses slipping off. "You planted this." Margaret slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, Mr. Carter. Do you have corroboration?" I nodded, handing her a printed report from Nate, cross-referenced with bank records. My team at Peakpulse can provide the raw data, I said. It's all there. Richard slumped in his chair, his bravado gone. Margaret turned to him, her voice ice-cold. You're suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. As Richard was led away, muttering threats, Margaret addressed me. Michael, your acquisition terms are generous, but we're concerned about integration. Can Peakpulse handle Nexlify's infrastructure? I smiled, the first real one in months. I built it once. I can rebuild it better documented, scalable, with a team trained to maintain it. No single points of failure. The board voted unanimously to accept Peakpulse's offer, valuing Nexlify at a quarter of its peak. Javier shook my hand afterward, whispering, you didn't just win, you rewrote the game. The acquisition closed in 6 weeks. Peakpulse rebranded Nexlify's assets under our name, and I was named CTO, overseeing the integration. I rehired half of Nexlify's old IT team, including Tara and Nate, and set up a documentation division to ensure no one could ever hold the system hostage again. Emma's insurance was reinstated through Peakpulse, and Sarah cried with relief when I told her. I even worked with Javier to create a scholarship fund for employees' kids, starting with a grant for Emma's college savings. The house was safe, the bills paid, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that would outlast me. Richard's fall was swift and public. The Seattle Times ran a front-page story. Nexlife CTO fired amid $4 million fraud. Scandal. Prosecutors charged him with embezzlement, and his Thine and penthouse was seized to cover legal fees. He tried to sue me, claiming I'd hacked the system to frame him, but my lawyer friend shredded his case with his own emails. The judge dismissed it in a day. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Richard had built his empire on lies, and it crumbled under the weight of truth. 6 months later, I stood in Peakpulse's new headquarters, a sleek campus overlooking Puget Sound. The server room hummed with the system I'd designed. Modular, transparent, built to last. Tara walked by, grinning. You know Cascade Heights gave us a 5-year contract. She said, they're calling you the guy who saved their tenants. I shrugged, but inside I felt a quiet pride. Not vengeance, not vindication, just the certainty that good work, done right, speaks louder than any lie. That evening, I drove home along Lake Union, the water glowing red and gold under the autumn sky. Sarah and the kids were waiting, Emma's laughter echoing from the backyard. As I parked, my phone buzzed a message from Tom Wheeler, Nexlify's founder, now retired in Arizona. Mike, heard what you did. You proved me right. Never should have let you go. I smiled, pocketing the phone. I hadn't needed revenge. I'd just moved forward, building something better, letting Richard's own choices destroy him. Sometimes, the best way to win is to let the truth do the talking.